face outside the closed door, which that is really something to say.
Even creepier, Oscar has never been wrong.
He's been pretty accurate. I know actually of no event where he wasn't at the bedside.
Now, usually in these videos, I'll ask you if you think a story is real or fake, but there's no disputing this one. It's 100% real. Oscar the Cat's amazing ability to predict the demise of patients was chronicled in 2007 in the New England Journal of Medicine, after he had accurately predicted the passing of over 25 patients. Since the publishing of that article, Oscar has now predicted the passing of over 100 patients. So the real question is, how does he do it? Is it ESP or some supernatural ability? Is it something paranormal? You decide. The Thing in the Tunnel. This next video is from Nuke's Top 5 viewer Sophie, who sent this exclusively to me, never posted it on social media of any kind, and never even asked for credit. She says that her friend Laura recorded this in an abandoned railway tunnel in Hassel, Germany. The tunnel was built in 1890 and it was used extensively by German troops during World War II. So, while on a weekend trip, Laura checks out the historic old abandoned rail tunnel. She's recording with her phone when she captures what is maybe one of the weirdest clips I've ever seen. Check it out. Something pale and thin can be seen rising up from the tracks in front of Laura on what looks like a thin little arm. As for Laura, she gets one look at the disturbing thing and just turns and makes a run for it. Now, watching this clip over and over, I honestly have no idea what this is. It looks like maybe a hairless torso with two skinny arms, getting up in a very unnatural way. Maybe it's an animal, maybe it's a very weird looking person. I just don't know. So you tell me what you think this is down in the comments. Someone watching over. A Nuke's Top 5 viewer who wishes to remain anonymous, let's just call him or her Alex for the sake of the video, emailed me about a CCTV recording captured at an undisclosed sleep lab during a sleep apnea test. Alex says that a coworker was monitoring a widowed female patient's sleep. And then this happened.
Let me just start recording. Oh my god. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Yes. It's gone now.
Now, to get a better understanding of what is going on, a bit of explanation is necessary. So the squiggly lines that can be seen at the bottom of the screen indicate that the woman has stopped breathing during her sleep. The mysterious pale figure then appears to reach out to wake the woman, after which she begins to breathe again. Alex believes the apparition might have been the patient's deceased husband, still carefully watching over her beyond the grave. But what do you think this strange pale shape could be? Let me know down in the comments.
Let me just start recording. Oh my god. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Yes. It's gone now.
The Watts house. The strange events at the Watts family home in Colorado might be one of the most reliably documented hauntings of all time, because every piece of paranormal evidence comes from footage recorded directly by policemen on their body cams.
Frederick Police Department, anybody in the house, make yourself known!
So Shannon Watts and her daughter Bella and Cece lost their lives under absolutely horrible circumstances, all at the hands of husband and father Chris Watts. In fact, the details of the case are so grim that I'm not going to go into them here. But if you want to read the full story, you can simply Google the Watts family. In this video, two women from the police K-9 unit go through the Watts house to investigate the strange disappearance. Obviously, this video was recorded before the tragic fate of Shanann and her children were known. This footage is 100% real. It is documented police video captured by one of the investigators' body camera. So shortly after entering the house, they catch some strange video on the stairs.
Smells like cleaning, doesn't it?
Many viewers believe this looks like a quick glimpse of a childlike apparition descending the stairs, but it could just be a video glitch. But then the policewoman begins to catch multiple strange and unusually clear EVPs on her body cam.
So there's your attic access right there. So there's your attic access right there.
But strangest of all, while investigating an upstairs closet, the officers actually hear something that seems to spook them.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
The unexplained voice of a giggling child can be heard, but there's absolutely no explanation for where the sound came from. The K-9 officer is so spooked, she asks the other officer to check it out.
Oh my gosh. What in the world is that? Wow. Go in there and step on that little blue thing and see if that's where that noise came from.
Yeah, it sounded like a kid toy.
It might. It sort of sounds like it.
Something. I heard it.
Did you hear it?
I did.
It sounded like a kid giggling or something, didn't it? Or a kid.
It did.
That was strange. Well, we're making note of that.
I heard it. I definitely heard the same thing you did.
Yeah, and then he just sort of turned around.
So is the Watts house haunted by the unsettled spirits of Shanann and her daughters? Or are these simply random, seemingly very clear noises? What do you think? It's cold outside, but you can keep warm in some all-new Nuke Stop 5 merch. Now, of course, we have t-shirts, hoodies, and coffee mugs, but we also have blankets, pillows, and long sleeves. We've even got stockings and wrapping paper. Anyway, shipping is free and be sure to order by December 10th to get delivery before Christmas. Go to nukestop5.com to shop now. Or, like whenever you feel like it. Maybe after the video. Guardian Angel. A shopkeeper in Adana, Turkey was closing up for the night, bringing in his store's produce and other items from the sidewalk outside his store. Little did he know that he was in imminent danger. Luckily, a very mysterious stranger was there to look out for him. Watch this unexplained clip very closely. Notice that the man who taps the shopkeeper's shoulder doesn't even look back or seem to see the oncoming truck. The vehicle actually turns onto the street while his back is turned.
Tam şu noktada açıldı kapağı.
Yani adamın kapağı görmüş olma ihtimali var mı?
Bence hiç zannetmiyorum. Ben sonradan gördüm bu kapağı. Zaten kamerada da gördüğü gibi.
The shopkeeper says that he looked around after the incident, but the man seemed to have mysteriously vanished. So just how did this strange man seemingly predict the accident that was about to happen and warn the shopkeeper?
Ama o adam nereden gördü arabanın kapağını, dikkat etti de bana işaret etti, o gitti. Adam sonradan da kayboldu gitti yani, adam nereye gitti?
Adam tanıyor musunuz?
Yok, tanımıyorum.
Even if this video was all set up and a fake, then it was amazingly well timed. But I'd love to hear any theories you guys might have, so let me know down in the comments. the Seance Witch. Paranormal investigator Brad Mack and his team are investigating a place called The Cage in a little town called St. Osyth in England. The site has a very dark history. Starting in the year 1582, this building was used as a prison, but not just any prison. The jail was used to confine and execute women convicted of witchcraft. Brian Mack says that during their paranormal investigation, his team heard strange footsteps and whispers. They saw lights flicker for no reason, and they even felt something bite or pinch them on several occasions. One member of their team, named Vanessa, was so shaken up that she absolutely refused to stay in the building after dark. But the most bizarre incident was yet to come. Late that night, the group decided to perform a seance to contact the ghosts of the convicted women who had died there. As Brian Mack watched and recorded from another room, he saw something very strange happen to a woman in the group.
Face has completely changed. Doesn't even look like a person.
Right, Debbie, you need to come down here for a minute, please.
Oh, that is weird, man. Face has completely changed. Doesn't even look like a person.
One seance member's face actually begins to change and contort into something that can only be described as horrific. Her nose seems to grow and her mouth stretches into a bizarre, inhuman grin right in front of the camera. Fearing for the woman's safety, they call down and remove her from the group. After the seance, the woman has a strange burn mark down the back of her neck, even though she had been dressed in several layers of clothing. She later said that after the incident, she experienced horrible nightmares and bizarre occurrences around her home. So was this some supernatural possession by a ghost caught on camera? Or just a trick of the light? Let me know what you think down in the comments. A whisper on the wind. This next clip is from Big Brother Brazil in 2004. In this video, one of the contestants named Cida is sunbathing when she suddenly hears a strange voice calling her name.
Ué, eu ouvi meu nome. Cida? Quem tá chamando? É na casa?
But no one is calling her name. In fact, she is all alone until one of her roommates walks outside.
Ah, é você que tá chamando? É. Ai, que susto. Ainda bem que você chamou. Desculpa. Eu acho que você tá muito bem, não.
Posso ter morado? Por quê?
Eu tava aqui lavando roupa, né? Aí de repente ela levantou. Quem tá me chamando? Quem tá me chamando? Da produção? Quem tá me chamando? Aí, quando disse quem tá me chamando, aí eu chamei. Ela, oi. Ai, que bom. Foi você que tava me chamando? Eu era? Eu não era? Aí ela, ai, que estranho, porque eu confundi com a voz da minha irmã. Parecia que era minha irmã que tava me chamando.
Now this is where things get very weird. The roommate says that Cida thought the voice calling her name was her sister's. Just a few minutes later, and Cida is called into the production room by the Big Brother executives. She finds out that unfortunately, her very sick sister Gloria has just passed away.
Estava preparada.
Even stranger, Cida's sister passed away at almost the exact same time that Cida heard her sister's voice calling her name.
E ontem, o que aconteceu exatamente? Foi tão impressionante, você ouviu alguém te chamando, e era o quê? Meia hora, 45 minutos depois da morte da Glória. O que você ouviu? Você ouviu ela te chamando?
Ouvi.
Mais de uma vez?
Muito mais.
E só dizia o seu nome?
Só meu nome. Aí eu achei que fosse minha imaginação. Aí eu fiquei procurando. Procurei sem ninguém. A única pessoa que tava era Thaís. Lavando o tênis do quarto.
Now bear in mind, this was all broadcast live on Brazilian TV. So, is this proof of life after death broadcast on television? Is it proof that loved ones can contact us from beyond the grave? Or is it just a very odd coincidence? Let me know what you think. The end of the road. Popular Guatemalan news reporter Vivian Vasquez is driving in traffic on her way to work to report the early morning news. But she will never make it to the news station, because Vivian herself becomes the tragic subject of the morning news when her lifeless body is discovered in a horrible car accident. Her family, co-workers, and fans are shocked and saddened when they hear of her sudden, tragic passing. Guatemalan traffic police show up on the scene and record footage of the wreckage as evidence. But after the video is released to the public, mourning viewers and fans all hear something in the footage that is absolutely chilling. And this time, did you hear it? The anguished voice of a woman can be heard crying out in Spanish, "What did you do to me?" When watching the footage, it becomes clear that it makes no sense for anyone present at the site of the accident to be screaming, "What did you do to me?" Vivian's loyal fans believe that it was her anguished spirit crying out from beyond the grave. To this day, the Guatemalan authorities have not found the cause of Vivian's accident. Even stranger, Vivian's cell phone was never returned to her family, and no one knows why. So just what happened to Vivian Vasquez? And what are your thoughts on this bizarre and tragic recording? Let me know down below. A cry for help. This video was posted to Reddit by user Unknown Truth. He says that his friend's wife had a very odd experience one day as she walked outside to do laundry. The strange incident was caught on their Ring doorbell camera. The woman hears some strange voice, and it's not coming from the Ring camera speaker. In fact, she checks closely, and the voice is coming from the wall to her side. So I boosted the audio on this clip, and just take a listen. Some strange voice in the wall seems to be crying out for help. The woman is so freaked out that she goes inside and actually calls the police.
I looked around, I didn't see anybody out on the road or any cars or anything. So I went back to my Ring video to make sure I wasn't just usually hearing something.
I can hear somebody saying something back there.
Well, I posted it on there,
The police search the premises, but there's no one there, in the wall or elsewhere. So just what is this strange disembodied voice that seems to be begging for help? Let me know what you think. Mayor declares emergency ghost. Now the strangest thing about this next paranormal video might be the source, because this video was released by the actual mayor of the city of Armenia, Colombia, Jose Manuel Rios. So the security guard in this video says that he saw a male figure descend the stairs inside the mayor's office. He pursues the man, but the guy seems to vanish into thin air. The security guard can be seen on CCTV searching the area, but then things take a terrifying turn. In the video, the security guard appears to be suspiciously looking around the area, seemingly confused. Then suddenly an unseen force seems to attack the man and throw him into a banner. The guard can be seen looking around in panic with no assailant in sight. He then suffers another attack and 2 guards hurry over to help him. The somewhat shaken mayor of Armenia says that, quote, a bishop and other religious leaders will come to bless the mayor's offices, and that they will, quote, bring God's blessing to every corner of this workspace. Now it seems highly doubtful that the mayor of Armenia, Colombia would suddenly release a fake ghost video. So just what do you think happened to this security guard? Randonautica.
So I just went randonauting.
You probably already know what the app Randonautica is by now. But just in case you are a sheltered person, Randonautica is an app where you basically put in an intention, and most people will use something dark or a bit spooky, and then the app spits out random coordinates and tells you to go there and explore. It's like a scavenger hunt with no prizes. But here's the really weird thing. Some users swear that the Randonautica app taps into something. The universe, energy, the paranormal, some type of thing like that. They claim that they found really strange things and sometimes really scary things by following Randonautica's directions.
Sky. Oh my God.
So now let me tell you about one Randonautica exploration that is truly unexplainable. A group of teens in Seattle are exploring with the Randonautica app and are directed to a location near the water on a Seattle beach. When they get there, they find a mysterious suitcase near the shore.
Guys, we found a suitcase at the beach.
Gabby, go. I'll hold your stuff.
Bro. Wait, open it. Open it.
It's sweet.
It stinks, y'all.
It washed out.
Oh. Oh.
The contents inside the suitcase smell horrible, so the teens immediately call the police.
Found a suitcase on the one and alcohol.
And now things get truly bizarre. because it turns out this small black suitcase contains the remains of a human body. The police investigate, and because of YouTube rules, I can't really tell you any more about that. But let me say, this incident is 100% documented. It is not a fake video. It is not an elaborate hoax. You do not get to decide. In fact, you can even look this up because this case was reported by multiple reliable news outlets. So you decide this. Was this random chance? Or is Randonautica just f***ing spooky? You decide. The Haunted Hill House. The Hill House in Mineral Wells, Texas is said to be one of the most haunted locations in the U.S. With its 125-year dark and troubling past, that doesn't come as much of a surprise. The home was once a haven for illegal activity. It served as a gambling hall, a bootlegging operation, and even a brothel. It also served as a makeshift hospital for over 50 years. It is said that the Haunted Hill House is inhabited by the ghosts of at least 9 people who lost their lives there. So, one night in late September, a group of friends and family rented the Hill House to just have a little fun. In fact, many of them were doubters who just wanted to prove that the so-called Haunted Hill House wasn't actually haunted at all. But that's not exactly how things went down. The house is said to be haunted by one particularly violent spirit that the house's owners refer to as Dr. Yeager. One of the visitors, Victoria, lays down on the bed in one of the rooms, and she jokingly starts taunting the ghost of Dr. Yeager. It did not go well.
As you can see, she was yanked off the bed. This was not a fall. And then they ran out. We're gonna rewind that and we're gonna show you in regular screen.
Something seems to violently yank Victoria right off the bed as her friends look on in terror. The house has a static black and white security camera in every room, and it catches the action as Victoria is pulled off the bed and the group makes a run for it. One of the guys is so shook, he even drops his phone and just leaves it on the floor behind him. Now, cut to about an hour later, around 3 a.m. A guy named Drew wants to test this alleged paranormal activity for himself. So he enters the same room and immediately begins taunting the ghost of Dr. Yeager, saying that the spirit is a coward and that if he really wants to attack someone, why doesn't he try attacking a man instead?
Look at the guy in the white hat right here, guys. Follow him.
Before I even finish my sentence, in the air.
All right, we're gonna pull it back. Did you see he got pushed?
So Drew got his wish. He is violently shoved by something, and then he almost knocks down his 2 friends while making a mad dash from the room. It should be noted that Drew has gone on record as saying that he will never set foot back inside the Haunted Hill House ever again. But it gets even weirder, because as Drew and his friends run from the room, something seems to yank the door shut behind them. If you watch closely, you can actually see the doorknob move as if it's being pulled. So is the Haunted Hill House one of the most haunted places on Earth? Would you go into that room and taunt the spirit of Dr. Yeager? Let me know down in the comments. They live. This next bizarre video was recorded at a private party in a banquet hall in Russia. The party was attended by billionaires, supermodels, and politicians. Basically, some of the most rich and powerful people in Russia. Popular Russian musician Sergei Shnorov and his band Ruble were hired to perform at the event. But something very odd happened when there was an unexpected temporary power failure in the venue. The video captures the bizarre glowing eyes of some of the attendees. Although the video only captures a few of them, witnesses claim that most of the people at the party had these same strange glowing eyes.
Выступление, на самом деле, как выступление, но что-то случилось со светом в прекрасный момент, просто погас. Почему-то у большинства людей, которые были в зале, а там были люди совершенно такого серьезного полета, стали светиться глаза. Барабанщик у нас, собственно, выронил палочки, и больше мы песен не играли. Было пи***ц как страшно, поэтому мы съебались оттуда даже. Я и не помню, как мы дома оказались.
А кто эти люди были? Можешь назвать фамилии?
Да чего ты? Ага.
Now, once this bit of video became public, there were all sorts of wild conspiracy theories. Everything from that the Russian cultural elite were all aliens or reptilians, to even claims that they were all vampires. But the prevailing theory was almost as bizarre. Many people believe that these rich and powerful people were using mysterious biological experiments to stay young. So the theories on this one are divided, but pretty much all of the explanations offered are creepy and strange. So the question remains, what could cause a room full of the Russian elite to have eyes that glow in the dark? First ghost hunt, last ghost hunt. Reddit user Manda Burke and her husband were exploring the haunted Hillview Manor, an old mental asylum located in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Manda says that they walked around the asylum with a tour group, checking EVP meanings that were given to them by the tour guide. But she says nothing much happened. Then they began to hear an odd shuffling sound at the end of one of the halls, but they thought nothing of it. Then suddenly, from the end of the hall, they heard running footsteps charging right toward them. Manda says that the whole event was one of the scariest things she's ever experienced. Now, I should note that I don't usually show videos without some visible or audible evidence of the supernatural. But looking at the reaction of this group and seeing just how hard and painful those falls look, I think this is pretty compelling evidence that something came down that hall. Also, again, Manda and her friends are not ghost hunters, they're not YouTubers, and they're not TikTokers. She simply posted this video to Reddit to share her strange experience.
Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and I have a viewer submission of a cryptid sighting for you today. I received it in 2022. Here it goes. Hey Bob, I wanted to share an experience that I broadly call a Bigfoot sighting. It's become something of a core memory, and I mean core memory in the sense that it was my first experience with the level of attitudes that I try to maintain to this day. For one reason or another, this Bigfoot sighting was a defining moment of my life. I remember the day it happened far more vividly than I remember most days from when I was that age. It was 1995, and it was the end of summer, either one of the last days of August or first days of September. I was 12 years old, and about to start the 6th grade. That summer, the summer of '95, I was in a relatively upscale summer camp, relatively in bold. And by upscale, I mean that they didn't just lock us into a sweltering gymnasium all day. We took a field trip every Friday. Now, living in rural Missouri, you run out of places to go pretty quickly. That is, places you can drive to and from within a reasonable amount of time. So naturally, they took us to a cave. And it was pretty cool, actually. We took a tour and I talked my friend out of buying a rock, so it was a pretty good time. Then we went to Tonka State Park. There wasn't a tour or anything. We just trudged around with camp counselors and parent chaperones. And it was a very hot day. I remember seeing the ruins of a castle that some rich guy planned in the beginning of the 19th century, but he died in one of the state's first car accidents in 1906. His sons completed the castle in 1923, but it caught fire and was abandoned in the 1940s. I remember the cliffs and the lake and a natural rock bridge that we all walked under. It was a good day, punctuated by bag lunches, juice boxes, and the weakest of the herd dropping like flies due to the heat. But surprisingly, my Bigfoot encounter was not in the primordial cave, nor was it among the forsaken fortifications of the fake castle. My sighting occurred after we trundled back onto the bus and began our 3.5-hour ride home. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep, as I was all tuckered out. If I remember anything about that age, it's that we weren't known for conservation of energy, though it's very possible I blacked out because of the heat. It was truly a sweltering day, but I woke up when the bus slowed at a rest stop. Now, I didn't make note of the address at the time. It was some years after the fact that I sat down and tried to figure out exactly where my sighting took place. I can't be 100% certain because I'm sure there are similar looking places within the 200-mile route, but I am reasonably confident that this took place at the eastbound rest area in Newburgh, Phelps County, Missouri. There's no gas station or anything, it's just a truck stop, and we only stopped there to use the bathroom, stretch our legs, drink a juice box, and get some relief from the furnace-like school bus. So we clambered out of the bus, found a shady spot, and drank cold drinks and stretched our legs for a while. Just catching a breeze felt like air conditioning at that point. And then, after everyone had used the facility, we lined up to throw stuff away in a trash bag. And this is where the cryptid sighting begins. It was right before I dropped my trash into the bag that I saw, from the corner of my eye, a face looking at me from behind a tree. It was certainly less than 50 feet away. Not far. My best guess would be between 40 and 45 feet away. The tree it was behind was part of a tree line, but slightly forward, closer to us than the rest. It was one of the only trees in the area that was in grass that was mowed. Part of its body must have been visible, but I have no recollection of it. I was too focused on the face, which I can only describe as extremely disturbing. I think this is important. When I first noticed it, I did not think it was human. It was apparent that this was something else. I know that in some encounters, you hear that at first they thought it was a man, and then only after further scrutiny do they realize it's not a man. That's not what happened to me. At no point did I think this was a person. Whatever I saw did not register as human to my mind. Everything about it is hard to explain. The flesh of the face was smooth, too smooth. Smooth enough to look fake or artificial, almost like porcelain. The face itself was hairless, or so it seemed, and it was colored very much like a not quite yet ripened peach. It was yellowy, a yellow beige, but with these very bizarre purple-red splotches that started by its neck, convalesced in the corner of one lip, and then spread to the rest of its face, but gradually tapered off. They were deep, deep purple, almost red. The mouth was small. I don't remember lips, and I don't remember teeth. Its mouth was closed, but the crease was long. I took all of this in a second, and I didn't move to face it directly. I think I realized that had I turned to look at it, it would have disappeared behind the tree. I was just watching it out of the corner of my eye. I say corner because that's the expression, but it was really just slightly to my left. I remember that the other kids behind me were irritated as to why I wasn't moving, like I was hogging the bag, because I was frozen, just standing over the bag without dropping my trash in, but I was fixated on the yellow face. It had a receded hairline, and what I would call peach fuzz on the top of its head, where normal hair should have been. Its forehead was completely smooth. It had absolutely no creases, wrinkles, or hair on its forehead whatsoever, and its forehead was shiny. The shape of the head was elongated, or more ovular than a person's, which may be why the hairline looked so receded. The nose was round, and the nostrils were like slits, like trenches instead of holes. Yes, it did have a brow ridge, but nothing like a gorilla. It was smooth and raised above the eyes, but gracefully, or gracilely, dipped backward then upward. The brow was like a recurved bow. Its eyes were not sunken into the brow. They were forward like ours. It was too far away to see eye color, or maybe I just don't remember the eyes. But I don't recall them being overly large or overly small. They weren't sunken, and it was obviously watching intently. Then it tilted its head very slightly, before slowly withdrawing behind the tree. I don't know. All of this happened in maybe 6 to 10 seconds. And I knew it was still there because I would have seen it if it left. The tree it was behind was an outlier to the tree break, slightly closer to us than the rest of the trees, and it was one of the few trees that had grass mowed around it. and I just stood there until one of the adults asked if I could tie the bag, because I was one of the few people still not on the bus. And I did. And I was probably blinking back tears when I saw a girl, one of my fellow campers. I could see by her posture that she was alarmed, and she was looking in the general vicinity of where I saw the thing. And I looked just in time to see the creature, humanoid, biped, whatever you want to call it, dashing through the trees. It must have used the tree trunk it was behind as cover while it ran to the woods proper. I want to say I remember curly dark hair on its shoulders, but I can't be sure of that detail. It wasn't overly broad or overly tall. Maybe it was a little hunched, but maybe that's because it was trying to keep a low profile. I mostly just remember an upright figure flashing through the trees. It was similar in color to a deer. Now this girl, I don't remember her name, and I'm going to be honest. She was memorable to me because she was Asian, and she was the only Asian person I'd ever met at that point in my life. I think she was Korean, and all I really knew about her was that she was always reading, and that she was incredibly soft-spoken, frustratingly so. Up until this point, you could say that I had kind of socially dismissed her, just because every time I'd interacted with her, I couldn't understand her because she was so quiet. And sure enough, as we were getting on the bus, she said something, but I couldn't hear it, so I just nodded at her. I took a seat next to my friend, but told him to vamoose. She had no one in particular she wanted to sit with, so I flagged her over and she seemed grateful, and so was I because I really wanted to talk about it. We both scanned the woods as the bus drove away, but we saw nothing. For an hour or more, we sat there in silence, and I twiddled my thumbs. I wanted to talk about what we saw. With nothing particular boosting my courage, I asked if she saw its face, because I knew she saw it while it was running away, but I didn't know if she saw it head-on. She stared straight at the seat in front of her and nodded. This may sound weird because we were sitting right next to each other, but this was the first time I actually looked at her, and her eyes were glassy, and her expression wasn't telling me anything, and she wouldn't look at me. She seemed uncomfortable, but I'm not sure if it was related to the cryptid. And that was it. That was the extent of our discussion about the thing. So then I guess we have to fast forward about 10 years, to 2004, so I'm 22 or something like that, and I'm at the movie theater with, I know, my parents. But we saw Fellowship of the Ring together in theaters, and then the second one, so I guess we had to finish off the trilogy together. So I'm sitting there, wedged between my parents, enjoying the movie with my drum of popcorn and bucket of soda. And during what may be the best scene to ever be on any screen anywhere, what I saw made me choke on my Mr. Pibb. I attached a screenshot. This right here is very similar to what I saw. Very similar. No, I don't mean to suggest that it was in any way intentional. I don't think Peter Jackson's costume designers tried to mimic the rare Missouri peach troll. I'm sure it was a coincidence, but this is very, very similar to what I saw, and it gives me chills. There are differences, of course. I can't say I recall ears at all, and the mouth was closed, so I didn't see any teeth, and the nostrils on the orc's nose are too flared. What I saw had narrow nostrils. Also, the face I saw was just cleaner. The costume designers here obviously smudged this mask for texture and effect. The face I saw was like it had just been washed with some sort of exfoliating soap. It almost glowed. And I understand if you say, so you mean it was nothing like that. But I led with the detractors. Here's why the two are similar. The color is pretty damn close. Obviously the movie monster doesn't have the weird purpley splotches that started by its neck, and then spread but faded to the rest of its face. But the peachy yellow is similar, though what I saw was brighter. The head shapes are similar, though what I saw was more elongated and ovular. The nostrils were like slits, and they were longer than a person's. The nose wasn't like the orc's, but it was still abnormal. The smoothness or lack of wrinkles is similar. The compound bow shape of the brow above the eyes is spot on. The wispy, thin hair that starts high on the head is accurate. I know this is just an actor or actress with a bunch of latex and movie magic, but the expression got me too. Just this very intent, wide-eyed, expectant observation. Sitting there in the movie theater, it was on screen for less than a second, but it was more than enough to rocket me right back to 1995, and I hadn't even thought about it in a long time. But in that second, it was like I was there all over again. That tiny moment in such a long movie was enough to give me full-body chills, a visceral and physical response, and it made me think of her. So this is strange, but it's why I like your channel. You get into some of the more subtle weirdness about weird things, the weird within the weird, and I think I have one about this. Since the day it happened, I've had this inexplicable and overwhelming feeling that this was not my sighting, if that makes any sense. What I mean by that is I don't think I was the main character. I feel like this was her deal, and I was just a bystander. I can't begin to pick apart what I mean by that, but that's how I feel now, and it's how I felt then. Maybe she's been dealing with these entities or things for a long time. It almost seemed like she wasn't even surprised. I wanted to talk about it, but she kind of acted like it was best to ignore it, almost like she had a standard operating procedure. And who would have an SOP for this kind of event? Sure, I'll answer questions. How certain am I that this was not human? As certain can be. At least, defining human as Homo sapien. Maybe it was a different species or something, but it definitely was not a human as I know it. I said it was the color of a deer, but I also said it had yellow flesh. Was it wearing some form of clothing, or was it covered in fur or hair? Honestly, I hadn't once thought of that until I contacted you. I don't know. I'm inclined to say it was wearing pelts or fur of some kind, but maybe that's just because that was my perception at the time. I cannot visually recall the body very well. I remember the face as if I saw it yesterday, but I really only saw the body for a second as it was running away, and I really just made out the color and the shape. Am I sure it wasn't a deer? Yes, I'm sure it wasn't a deer. I said the nose wasn't like the Loder orc, but still abnormal. How was the nose abnormal? Just different. Different from what we see every day. I wouldn't say it was bigger or smaller, just shaped differently. Our nostrils are holes that point down. This thing's nostrils were like trenches that ran backwards and up. This sighting doesn't sound very Bigfootish. Why do I classify it as such? The way I see it, there are two types of sightings, very ape-like and very human, though neither resemble apes or humans as we understand them. A non-human, human-like thing peeking from behind a tree, that's pretty Bigfooty. Assuming other people have seen things like this, then it's definitely in the Bigfoot arena. Other people would report them as such, even if there's something else going on. You made an argument about Bigfoot, using a dorm room fridge as an analogy, about noticing small changes in an environment, as to how something with a human-like brain could have enough awareness to remain elusive, and I've always thought that. For example, I'm a contractor. I do roofs. When I see a roof, I can't help it. I can't glance at a roof without running the numbers in my head. I see angles everywhere. I guess the length, the pitch, the rise, how many shingles and labor, how many guys, which guys, how long we'll need the dumpster. I can plan out a job in seconds, and with startling accuracy, assuming everything goes as planned. Which it usually doesn't, but I can usually account for that. This is not unique to me. I'm not trying to be arrogant. I know I'm by no means the only person who can do this. But stuff like that made me reflect on how unbelievably wily our brains are. The amount of math and calculation that I do without thinking about it is crazy, and I'm nobody. If something can even come close to replicating that brain function, let alone exceed it, then the sky's the limit. And if that's their survival strategy, then they do it all the time. No one is prepared to study the human life, but inhuman. That's why the study of chimps was so groundbreaking, and they obviously don't scratch the surface of what may be. I said in the beginning that this day had a lot of core memories. Can I say more about that? This was the first time I had ever experienced that type of fear. I don't even know what to call it. Pure fear, maybe? Until that point, I'd only ever experienced fear of consequence. Afraid I was going to get into trouble. Afraid I was going to disappoint someone. Something like that. I had recently fallen off my garage and sprained my elbow, giving me a lifelong fear of roofs. That had been a fear of pain. This was different. This was like a conceptual fear. Because when I saw the thing, at no point was I afraid that it was going to attack 3 buses of kids. It wasn't particularly big. I wasn't afraid it was going to run up to me and carry me off, even though in hindsight, maybe that's exactly what it wanted to do. But it couldn't have gotten away with it. There were too many people in too small a space, too much screaming, and too many fit people around. I wasn't afraid of this thing in the same way I would have been afraid of a bear or a lion or something, but it was closer to that kind of feeling. Maybe a better example would be if someone is afraid of snakes, they'll be afraid of a harmless garter snake, even though they know it can't hurt them. Strangely enough, maybe the closest emotional reference I have to seeing this face is when I see one of these guys hanging out on the wall, a house centipede. Just this intense terror and disgust. The knee-jerk reaction was similar, at least. This was like an instinctual fear. I'm convinced that our instincts, our genetic lineage, whatever you want to call it, I think we are ancestrally prepared to see this type of thing. So that's the first core memory, I guess. Just my first experience with that type of fear. The second, and this one seems pretty obvious, there are things that happen that you can't Google an answer for. I don't know what I saw. No one knows what I saw. And I just have to live with it. And there's kind of a peace that comes with that. It's out of my hands, and it is what it is. I guess the third core memory is the comfort of a shared experience, and also what I'll loosely define as manhood. This girl barely said a word to me, but she saw its face, meaning I wasn't crazy. And I remember feeling strangely content that I wasn't the only one that saw it, and being content in silence. And don't judge me too harshly, but I also consider this to be the first time in my life that I understood what being a real man was all about. I don't want to hit you up with too much information here, but she fell asleep on my shoulder. She felt comfortable or safe enough to fall asleep on me. That was a big deal for me. And yes, I thought she was cute at the time, and to add to that, unique or exotic. But there I was with a girl snoring softly on my shoulder, and I had not a single dishonorable intention or thought. That's why I said it was my first experience as a quote, real man. Me and my little friend group at the time were truly vile, filthy little creatures. But that was just zapped away at that moment. I knew we had just shared a relatively inconsequential, but still pretty profound experience. Quite possibly, we'd never meet another soul in our entire lives who would understand. And we didn't even need to talk about it. In hindsight, not needing to say anything said a lot. Respect, trust, and presence. That was my job as I sat there with my hands on my lap, and hell or high water wouldn't have stopped me from doing it. Earlier, I said that she had said something to me as we were getting on the bus, but that I didn't hear it. Do I have any guesses? No, I have no idea what she said. I'd really like to know, but it very well may just have been a pleasantry. Did I keep in touch with her? No, that was summer camp, and my last year of it. Evidently, we went to different schools. I have no idea what happened to her. I don't even remember her name. I remember that she was the only Asian. I think she was Korean. She was very soft-spoken, and she read a lot. Remember, this was the 90s. I don't know how old you are, but this was before social media. I said I wasn't the main character. What did I mean by that? This is about as woo-woo as I get, but just based on her reaction. She seemed more embarrassed than excited. She didn't seem surprised. Her reaction was just off. Maybe it was a cultural thing, but who knows? I was clearly chomping at the bit to talk about it, but she wasn't biting. One of these days I'm going to look into Asian folklore to see if there's anything out there that could account for the face. Okay, hi, back to me. Right off the bat, I'd like to mention that I always give my illustrators a vague idea of what I think the character should look like. In this case, I said I'm picturing the kid from Critters, just because that's the first thing that came to mind when I thought of a 12 or 13-year-old boy from the 90s. I didn't really expect him to grow up into just Leo, but that happened. And on the topic of illustrations, I made the particular call here not to tell illustrator Adrian about the Lord of the Rings orc when he made his illustration. I asked for the face as a standalone with no context, without the narrative parts, and I basically just copy-pasted the witness's description to him, and I was actually quite startled at how similar they turned out, especially the nose. When I first read this account, I thought of Bert from Sesame Street, which is rather terrifying in this context. Or most contexts. Eyewitness sketches are notoriously unscientific, and range from comically bad to unbelievably accurate. University of Stirling, in Scotland, conducted a study on forensic sketches. Participants studied a face for 60 seconds, and then immediately described the face to a forensic sketch artist. The sketches could be matched to the correct individual only 3% of the time. It's not a matter of memory. The problem is describing what you're seeing, and personally, I think it's because our facial recognition process is so innate, so ingrained within us, that we don't know how to describe it. We can't explain it. Like walking. I'm really good at walking. I do it almost every day, and I wouldn't know where to begin explaining how to do it. Perhaps sometimes, seeing a face is a little bit like riding a bike. It's hard to explain, and impossible to forget. When Adrian finished this face, I sent it to the witness for comment, and he said something like, "It's a good attempt," but what he saw made more biological sense than what we see in the illustration, which is understandable. It's rare to get such an exact location. This is it, or so he thinks, 50 or 60 feet behind the bathrooms. The sighting was in '95, so who knows how much it's changed in 10 years. I'm joking, I know it's 30 years. I don't live close to Missouri. Half of Missouri doesn't live close to Missouri, but it would be interesting to check out the area, though I'd suspect there's nothing to note. This area of Phelps County, Missouri used to be called Arlington, but after a highway was rerouted, the town of Arlington died. Literally, it became a ghost town, now hosting only less than 20 private residences. So that's a bit of spooky history, depending on how loosely you're willing to define spooky. I think as humans, we really like organization of ideas. It makes data more manageable. But when I first began to look into this type of thing, I really only gave any credence at all to the classic reports, the giant ape-human reports, which on the one hand makes sense, because indeed, those types of sightings make the most sense. But on the other hand, it seems like a bad practice to only report on the encounters that fit the preconceived mold. A cookie is still a cookie, even if you don't understand the cutter that spawned it. As for the witness's impression that this entity may have somehow been connected to the sole other witness, I don't know what to make of that, but I don't like it. Not at all. I don't know much about Korean folklore or Asian folklore. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments. Anyway, I'm up to my chest in videos at the moment, so I hope to have another one for you very soon. Make sure to like the video, that really helps me a lot. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And most importantly, and as always, thanks an awful lot for listening. Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin. I tend to steer clear of video analysis because we are talking about a multi-million, if not billion-dollar industry, which has the sole function of deceiving the eye, designed to manipulate perception and transport the imagination away from reality, even if only for a little while. In my opinion, there is no conclusive video evidence of Bigfoot, which is more or less what I would expect from the creature described. But the Mayaka ape photos are worth some scrutiny. The two photos have one of two outcomes. Either this is a hoax, or it isn't. Some aspects of these photos lead me to believe that this is an outright hoax, and that it should be dismissed. But still, there are a few features that have intrigued me for a number of years, but I'll start at the beginning. They were anonymously mailed, accompanying a letter to the Sarasota Police Department, which is located 2/3 down the state of Florida, on the Gulf side. The letter was addressed to an animal control officer. I'll read the whole thing to give you the best understanding of the narrative behind the photos. Dear Sir Ernie, enclosed, please find some pictures I took in late September or early October of 2000. My husband says he thinks it's an orangutan. Is someone missing an orangutan? It is hard to judge from the photos how big this creature actually is. It is in a crouching position in the middle of standing up from where it was sitting. It froze as soon as the flash went off. I didn't even see it, as I took the first picture because it was so dark. As soon as the flash went off for the second time, it stood up and started to move. I then heard the orangutan walk off into the brush. From where it was standing, I judge it as being about 6.5 to 7 feet tall in a kneeling position. As soon as I realized how close it was, I got back to the house. It had an awful smell that lasted well after it had left my yard. The orangutan was making deep whoomp noises. It sounded much farther away than it turned out to be. If I had known it was as close to the hedgerow as it was, I wouldn't have walked up as close as I did. I'm a senior citizen, and if this animal had come out of the hedgerow after me, there wasn't a thing I could have done about it. I was about 10 feet away from it when it stood up. I'm concerned because my grandchildren like to come down and explore in my backyard. An animal this big could hurt someone seriously. For 2 nights prior, it had been taking apples that my daughter brought from up north, off our back porch. These pictures were taken on the 3rd night it had raided my apples. It only came back one more night after that and took some apples that my husband had left out in order to get a better look at it. We left 4 apples. I cut 2 of them in half. The orangutan only took the whole apples. We didn't see it take them. We waited up, but eventually had to go back to bed. We got a dog back there now, and as far as we can tell, the orangutan hasn't been back. Please find out where this animal came from and who it belongs to. It shouldn't be loose like this. Someone will get hurt. I called a friend that used to work in animal control back up north, and he told us to call the police. I don't want any fuss or people with guns traipsing around behind our house. We live near I-175, and I'm afraid this orangutan could cause a serious accident if someone hit it. I once hit a deer that wasn't even a quarter of the size of this animal, and totaled my car. At the very least, this animal belongs in a place like Busch Garden, where it can be looked after properly. Why haven't people been told that an animal this size is on the loose? How are people to know how dangerous this could be? If I had known an animal like this was on the loose, I wouldn't have approached it. I heard on the news that monkeys that get loose can carry hepatitis, and are very dangerous. Please look after the situation. I don't want my backyard to become someone else's circus. God bless. I prefer to remain anonymous. I like how she references up north several times. Not all too descriptive if you're in Sarasota, Florida. She says she lives in Sarasota, east of I-175, which looks like this. Which does seem to contain a substantial human population beside a thick wilderness area, which will eventually become the Everglades if you go far enough south. Long story short, she was missing apples from a bushel that she left on her front porch. The location accompanied an unpleasant smell for 2 nights prior to the photos being taken, so she performed a stakeout. Clearly something alerted her to the presence of the creature. She went outside, armed with only her 1990s camera, to see what it was. She saw nothing until the flash of her camera illuminated this creature, that she says was only 10 feet away from her. She didn't know how close it was to her at the time. She said had she known how close it was, she wouldn't have gone outside at all. Here is her second flash. She said that it began to rise at the second flash, but it is still in a crouched position in the photos. She said it was between 6.5 and 7 feet tall. Again, crouched. Did you see the red flags? This letter and these photos are either a deliberate hoax or simply too bad to be a hoax. Would a hoaxer be so naive? I just can't imagine a situation where a person would see this in their backyard and go straight to hepatitis, which is transmitted through saliva breaking skin, which is a bite. And if this thing had me in its mouth, I would be less concerned about a blood disease and more concerned about having my very own chapter in the next book by David Politis. I mean, senior citizen or not, could anyone consider this to be an orangutan? So at the time, she was anywhere between 55 and 100 years old. I believe she knew how to use Microsoft Word in the year 2000, because the lines look too straight to be any typewriter I've ever used. I don't know, you tell me. Can someone live 60 or more years on this planet, with television, movies, encyclopedias, and magazines, with at a minimum, rudimentary computer knowledge? Really confuse an orangutan with this. Would a hoaxer, who actually wanted to pull off a hoax, write such a naive letter? Think about it. Would a hoaxer tell this story if he or she was trying to be convincing? She's a senior citizen who lives on the outskirts of a state park, who leaves apples on her back porch but gets upset when they're gone. She wanted to discover via photograph the culprit without a flashlight, taking pictures in the dark. It is an orangutan, or at least her husband thinks so. She hit a deer less than a quarter this size and it totaled her car. Is someone missing an orangutan? You know they can have hepatitis. Her grandkids play in the yard. They may not be safe from the orangutan. The orangutan that's 7 feet tall at a crouch with shaggy black hair and fangs that walks onto her Florida porch at night. Had I taken a picture at night to reveal this, I certainly would have kept snapping photos if I didn't die on the spot. But one would think that your average person would drop the camera to retrieve a gun. Failing that, would drop the camera to retrieve a telephone in order to summon the nearest person with a gun, ideally a larger one, to shoot alleged nocturnal beastie. Because if this is a photograph of a flesh and blood animal, then we are looking at an animal that could tear a person apart without skipping a beat. But don't worry, an animal like this is not going to get hit by your car. This would be a little too clever for that. Lauren Coleman managed to get his hands on the photos. He confirmed that they were taken in late October of 2000 and developed a couple weeks later, then mailed locally to the Sarasota Police Department. The photos were developed locally, so that lends a touch of credibility to the senior citizen possibility. These photos were at a minimum taken when the letter said they were, and developed presumably where a local would develop any photo. David Barksy, owner of a serpentarium and member of Sarasota's Animal Control Division, was very familiar with ape-like reports, both historical and recent, from the immediate area. He went as far as to say that police officers may laugh in public, but whisper in private. He regularly went on expeditions in Mayaca State Park. He claims that a handful of times he was driven out of the woods by something making a lot of noise. He was told that what he was doing is illegal without a permit. His attempts to acquire a permit have been denied. But don't jump straight to Bigfoot conspiracy there. Such permits are often denied because if he gets lost or injured out there, he then becomes the state's problem. Barksy and Coleman sent high-resolution scans to film analyst David Bittner of Pixel Workshop. Bittner said that he is confident that the photo was not tampered with, as in it's not a composite overlay or special effect, and that the object photographed is not a cutout, meaning the object has dimension and depth. So the photos are of something, though Bittner had no comment on what that something may be. Bear with me here, because this is by no means my area of expertise, but seeing as the palmettos in both photos move very little, that leads me to believe that the photographer did not relocate between shots, but they do seem to be positioned differently enough to account for the photographer or film subject to move or shift his or her stance between the shots, which is not consistent with a tripod because there is some there, but is consistent with a senior citizen who we would not expect to take a great leap backwards due to statistical physical condition. Again, not my area of expertise, but assuming the photographer moved only slightly between two shots in rapid succession, then it does seem that the subject moves. See that? But I'll come back to that in a minute. Cryptomundo dubbed the Mayaka ape photos a hoax. Here is Cryptomundo side by side of the Mayaka ape photos with a display of Bigfoot from Ripley's Believe It or Not in the Wisconsin Dells. Cryptomundo claims that the Mayaka ape photos are either this, or a display of the same style somewhere else. And they very well may be right. But that doesn't account for movement that the subject seems to have, nor does this display give me any indication of apparent eye shine and prominent dentition. But of course, the similarities are hard to ignore. And there is a Ripley's Believe It or Not in Orlando, Florida. I scrubbed through hundreds of TripAdvisor photos and general Google images. They had a lot of stuff on the skunk ape, but I couldn't find any of the same style. Doesn't mean there isn't one, but I couldn't find it. Cryptomundo may be right about this being a hoax, and they may be right about their display theory, but to me, these photos don't reflect a static or stationary object, in my opinion. Because again, it does seem to move. The late, great, and much-missed Bobby Short of Bigfoot Encounters said that someone identifying themselves as Mitsuko Choden, a primate specialist from Japan, said that this is a popular ape costume from the Orient. And she may be right, but the reach of Google, particularly Google Shopping, is vast. So is eBay and Amazon, and I couldn't locate any suit that struck me as particularly akin to this photograph. I'm not saying there is no suit, but I couldn't find it. I was a little surprised and frankly pleased with how few commercially available ape suits actually seem to exist. And just about all of them are laughable, especially for the price. This seems to be the top-of-the-line modern commercially available ape suit. And for only $2,200, shipping and handling not included, additional processing fees may apply. And this is why I stay clear from video analysis. Even though this seems rather impressive compared to a costume that costs a couple $1,000s, there does exist a market to make people look like apes. We'll never definitively know what this is. So let's, for the first time ever, give a witness the benefit of the doubt. She was a senior citizen in the year 2000, somewhere in her 70s or 80s at the time, meaning she was likely born in the 1910s, 20s, or 30s, meaning she lived through one, if not more, world wars, the threat of nuclear annihilation, a childhood without antibiotics. She's tough as nails, and this monster merits a strongly worded letter as opposed to immediate action, and if it looks like an orangutan, then it is an orangutan. Consarn it. Am I giving her way too much credit? More than likely, but maybe not. All of us have or have had some colorful and tenacious older relatives, right? If we look past the red flags and momentarily accept that a woman took these photographs and saw what she saw and sent the letter looking for legitimate help, then the story takes a turn toward the unsettling. And this is why I have scrubbed through these photos for years now. This creature, costumed or not, does exactly what a great ape would do in this situation. Textbook. And I can show you. The photos don't appear to have much detail at all, but I still see some curiosities. Chimps have the most expressive faces of the non-human primates, so they are the best analog in this regard. It is generally accepted that they have 6 facial expressions. There is the pant hoot, which suggests the chimp is excited, often related to sex or food. Basically, no teeth are visible, and the lips flare out like a duckbill. The bulging lip face is anger, and not always the type of anger that you have before you punch someone, but often the kind of anger where you stew and plot and sulk. There is the covered upper lip face, which is expressly playful or happy. Academically, I've been warned not to use words like happy or sad in application to non-human primates, but that is stupid in my opinion, and ignorant. If the upper teeth are covered but not the lower, they are happy and playing. This is the pout, which is a request or even beg for comfort or attention. I imagine there aren't many pictures of this, because the action of being photographed is in fact giving it attention or stimulation in some way. It is characterized by a downward-facing and vulnerable position, with no teeth showing, with the mouth either slightly open or shut but not tightly. Then there is the full-toothed smile or full-toothed grin, which conveys abject fear or submission. All the good photos of this are copyrighted, but feel free to look them up yourself. See how the combatives on the side aggressively approach with bulging lip face, meaning calculated anger, while the creature in the middle is doing a classic full-toothed grin, a fear response indicating that he submits or taps out. The full-toothed grin is a fear response, but to humans, it may appear as aggressive, which is exactly what it wants you to think if it's scared. And then there's the scream. Despite the name, this facial expression is not always accompanied by sound. When this expression is made, the creature often leans forward if intent is offensive, or leans backwards if the intent is evasive. The scream often arises as a culmination of any of the previous facial expressions, like fear turned into a scream when an aggressor made contact with her. No doubt after her child, if you can see those little hands sticking out from the rear. From a strictly primatological behavioral abstract, I would certainly hypothesize that the ape would display the full-toothed grin for fear at the first flash. Then at the second flash, exhibit the scream expression in a backward-facing angle to indicate intent of retreat as opposed to offensive action. Fear, then scream to indicate retreat. Fear, then scream to indicate retreat. Fear, then scream to indicate retreat. It's really quite textbook. To anyone who has spent a lot of time with these creatures, as I myself have. Again, in the confines of the narrative, the creature was already nervous. He knew people were to be avoided. He had probably seen their paths and their structures, but he had never actually seen one before. Now, there's a person right in front of him. He freezes and hunkers, relying on his amorphous silhouette and the dark coloration to avoid detection. Simple but effective, that's why deer do it. Then a flash of light. His agitation turns to terror as he realizes he's been registered. He didn't know humans could do that with the light. He's evaluating his options when a second flash culminates his fear into action, as is indicated by a scream, with a head tilted backwards, right before retreat. I've seen this before. The first photo, because of the angle of the flash on the subject, doesn't capture this, but the second one does. See the darkening around the eyes? Almost like a raccoon effect? Apes have that. Their protrusion of the brow ridge acts as a visor for the eyes. This is to the same effect as why football players darken their under eyes, to prevent light from bouncing off the cheeks and into the eyes, in addition to shading from direct sunlight. It also appears that the eye shine decreases significantly from the first photograph to the second. This could absolutely be the result of the camera's slight reposition, but it is also what one would expect from eyes acclimated to darkness and then rapidly constricting after the first flash. And do these teeth look obviously fake to you? Because they don't to me. In fact, it's just about more or less what you would expect from a primate. So the content of the letter is a bit much. I am not convinced that these photos are of a display. And it could be a costume, I guess. But the fact that the eye shine seems to significantly decrease between the two flashes indicates a dramatic constriction of an eye that is not used to bright lights. The visored eyes strike me as organic, but I suppose a mask would have that same effect. The subject gives a textbook fear response, followed by a back-facing scream and retreat, which I have seen numerous times in my own research. I don't like video analysis. I'm not saying these photos are of a real animal. We'll never know. But the fact remains that whether or not this creature is real, if this is in fact a proper archetype of Bigfoot in the South, then we are talking about a variety of hominids in North America. And as they say, the more the merrier. Make sure to like this video, subscribe if you'd like to keep updated, and as always, thanks an awful lot for listening. Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin. Today I want to talk about two men who very well may have encountered a large, uncatalogued primate in North America. Their experiences are not unique. Such encounters are reported relatively frequently, considering the rarity of the alleged creatures. But what makes the encounters unique is the witnesses themselves. The first witness is Doug Hychek. Hychek is a TV and film producer. He is best known for relative hits like Monster Quest and his collaboration in Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science. But it wasn't always that way. He began at the beginning, and what drew him into this world is curious. He filmed some small local TV shows in the 1980s when he began White Wolf Entertainment. He found a job from a director with KARE-11 out of Minneapolis. They were producing a documentary entitled The Lake That's Never Been Fished, about Lake Selwyn, an almost 300 square mile lake, some 800 miles north of Winnipeg. Hychek's task was to retrieve footage of giant lake trout, and obviously, by the name of the production alone, you can tell it is a desolate place. At that time, the lake had virtually no consistent human presence, and had not been commercially fished in any recent times. Hychek and another camera operator landed on a float plane on that narrow lake. Upon arriving on the shore, they found something they didn't expect. Something they weren't looking for. Crisp in the sand, ran a meandering path of footprints. Hychek had already begun production on a special called The Man Who Walks with Bears, though it wouldn't be aired for many years. So even early in his career, he knew more about bears than most. Hychek said that the prints were 17 inches long and 9 inches wide. His first thought was how could a bear make these prints, when perhaps the question should have been, what made these prints? There were no claws. Most importantly, however, unlike a bear, there were only 2 alternating feet, no apparent forelegs. He and his companion pondered how this clawless bear could produce double-step impressions so consistently. They were so curious that they began to follow the tracks. Hychek says that they walked down that desolate lake for a mile before realizing how fresh the tracks were, and that every step they took increased the risk of actually colliding with the track maker. So they turned around, not wanting to encounter some kind of oversized, malformed maybe bear. At which point, they hustled back to the float plane, where the pilot still unloaded the gear. They showed the pilot the tracks, and asked him to follow them from the sky. But the pilot refused, and he wouldn't speak of it. Maybe it was a matter of wasting fuel, maybe it wasn't, but the pilot would not give his opinion on the tracks. They relocated, as setting up camp on the game trail of something massive is never advisable. Hychek got his footage, and went back to the States. So if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering, why didn't he take any footage or photographs? Wasn't he a photographer? Well, as I think I already said, in the moment, he thought the prints were from a bear. He thought, how did a bear make these tracks? Not, what if a bear didn't make these tracks? He thought they were from a bear, he just wasn't sure how. Bear tracks certainly aren't worth filming, especially when you're on someone else's dime, with what I'm sure must have been a strict schedule, with the plane and all, and you can imagine why they would immediately leave the area. Do you want to unpack your food supplies and hang out on a game trail of what you think may actually be the largest existing terrestrial carnivore alive today? Plus, the pilot was intent on retreating. And when you're 400 miles away from nowhere, it's probably wise to trust the local, who also happens to be your ride. The Minnesotan had no concept of Bigfoot actually being real, and Bigfoot didn't even come up on the trip. It wasn't until after the tracks marinated in his mind for a while that his curiosity piqued. He asked a bear expert what kind of bear, or a bear under what kind of circumstance, could leave such a trackway. The answer is none. No bear could leave such a trackway, and there are 3 reasons for that. And first, his stride. Now this is a bit more complicated than it may seem. An adult grizzly bear's stride at a gallop is about 2.5 meters, or 98 inches. And that's according to grizzly bear locomotion, gaits, and ground reaction forces from the Journal of Experimental Biology from 2005. A stride is not the distance between 2 prints, it is the distance between the same point of the same foot. So we know the rear foot is longer than the front foot, and then based on the curvature, it's pretty simple to label the feet. Then the distance between the heel, for lack of a better word, of the right front foot to the same point of the same foot should be about 100 inches for a big grizzly moving fast. Highcheck said the distance between the left and right foot, not right to right or left to right, but the distance between the left to right, so the 2 feet nearest each other, was 40 inches. So the distance between his tracks was just under half that of the stride of a large galloping grizzly. Now the prints of a bear should be relatively equidistant between the stride, as obviously all 3 additional feet should touch the ground before a foot repeats. Since in this image I'm using, we first see the right front foot, then comes the right rear foot, then the left front foot, then the left rear foot, before we see that right front foot again. And that's the stride. Now this is important. Highcheck didn't say the stride of his tracks were 40 inches. He said they were 40 inches apart. So again, if that yellow line is theoretically around 100 inches, then the prints I put beside them are about 40 inches apart. Highcheck doesn't specify if he meant they were 40 inches from heel to heel or from heel to toe, so since I don't have the exact measurements, I'm not going to take the time to make it perfectly to scale. Very long and complicated story short, if his tracks were 40 inches apart, they were made by a biped. A large and long-bodied bear simply has to put its feet down more frequently, as they typically will have 3 feet, or 3 points of contact with the ground at all times while in motion. And this is also why a bear can't consistently double step. During a turn, a bear can double step. I don't think a bear is capable of double stepping repeatedly, unless it's stepping in tracks from an earlier occasion. If the length between the footprints was in fact 40 inches, then this rules out a quadruped. Even if a bear had some sort of injury on its front feet, causing it to walk on its rear legs, 40 inches is simply too long for the shuffling gait of a bear on 2 legs. Very long and complicated story, even shorter. The prints he saw came from a biped, if we're to trust his description. But aside from the stride, there is another reason his track find cannot be from a bear, and this one is much more simple. There were only 2 feet. Bear hind feet leave much longer prints than the front feet. This is an image of grizzly bear prints. The rear right foot is in front and is longer than the front foot. The longer rear footprint also has less pronounced claws, though I believe this image must be of a cub because the claws are rather short even on the front foot. This is actually a better image with a more mature grizzly, I think, and a more conducive substrate. See, the hind or rear paw is longer than the front paws, and the claws are easily distinguishable because of the mud. This is a giveaway about what is from a bear and what isn't. If the prints came from a quadruped, there would be variance between front and back feet, not just left and right feet. I'm not sure how his tracks can be from a bear, because his trackway was only made by 2 feet. Highcheck didn't see left rear, left front, right rear. Highcheck just saw left and right. If indeed the track maker was a quadruped, there would be variance of not just left and right, but forward and backward. What I mean to say is that in a mile of tracks, there were only 2 feet visible, not 4. A bear's front feet and hind feet are noticeably different, and Highcheck only saw 2 distinct footprints, one after the other, meaning that the track maker was on 2 feet. Regardless of the superficial similarities between the hind foot of a bear and an enlarged, human-like foot, the fact remains it is simply impossible for a bear to not leave behind prints from the rear and front feet. Sure, a step or two perhaps could overlay, but eventually the tracks would exhibit more than 5 toe pads, and it should be fairly obvious when the bear is stepping in another trackway of prints. Also, grizzly bear have larger front claws than hind claws, so some of the footprints should have had more pronounced claws, and some should have had less pronounced claws. The fact that Highcheck is adamant that he only saw a left and right variance, as opposed to a right front, right rear, left front, left rear, in itself is enough to rule out a bear. If his prints were from a bear, it was a bipedal bear. A clawless bipedal bear. The final reason that negates bear being the origin of his track find is the width to length ratio. Highcheck's prints were described as the proper width of a grizzly, Kodiak, or polar bear at 9 inches wide, but no bear print can be 9 inches in width and 17 inches in length, not rear foot or front foot. This is a crisp bear track in the snow. This is a rear paw. They were kind enough to include a tape measure, and if I move the tape measure, it looks like the width is 5.5 inches, and the length is about 7 inches, from the start of the claw to the point farthest back. That means the width is 78% of the length. Here is another bear. This one a Kodiak bear. This is a front paw. It looks to be about 9 inches wide and 6.5 inches long, meaning the width is about 140% of the length. In bear front feet, the width is greater than the length. Approximately, and emphasis on approximately, a bear's front foot has a width 148% of its length, and the rear paw has a width that is 78% of the length. I know some of you are going to say percentage shouldn't exceed 100%, but I think this is the most tangible way to express the concept. So if we look at Highcheck's description, 9 inches wide and 17 inches in length, then the width is 52% of the length. According to ergonomics, the average male foot in North America is about 10.25 inches, with a width of 4 3/4, meaning an average adult male foot has a width about 45% of the length. And that's because we're bipeds. An alleged 9 by 17 inch track is much closer to a biped like a human than a quadruped like a bear at 52%. Theoretically, human feet are narrowest because they are arched, unlike the feet of the alleged creature. Much like in architecture, an arch is ideal for bearing steady weight, while a flat bottom is tried and true and better suited for sustaining damage without resulting in structural failure, which is ideal for something that apparently easily traverses terrain that humans would consider obstructive. Basically, the tracks Highcheck describes are relatively too long for their width to belong to either the front or rear foot of a bear. They have a width ratio closer to that of humans, but still greater than a quadruped, as should be expected. A grizzly bear's front paw can reach a width of 9 inches, but then the length shouldn't exceed 8 or 9 inches on the front paw, and a grizzly bear's rear paw can also have a width of 9 inches. But using that 78% ratio, the length shouldn't exceed 12 or 13 inches. Again, everything here is approximate, but if either the rear or front foot of any bear has a width of 9 inches, then the length simply cannot be 17 inches. Not even close, really. And even if the length was 17 inches, then the width would be at least that. And that's why it's impossible for any bear paw to be both 9 inches wide and 17 inches in length. At least some of the footprints would have the equal width, and that would be a giveaway that it's from a giant bear. Anyhow, Kodiak bears are typically confined to the Pacific coastline. If it was simply an enormous Kodiak print, it really should have been fairly obvious, especially for a Canadian bush pilot and 2 wildlife photographers. The same thing goes for polar bears. If the width is 9 inches, then the length can't really be near 17 inches, though polar bear would leave no or almost no sign of claw marks, as their claws serve more as cleats than pry bars like brown bears. I don't think Highcheck saw bear prints on that day some 30 years ago. The stride is inconsistent with the quadruped. The lack of rear foot, front foot variance indicates a biped, and no bear track under any circumstance can be 9 inches wide and 17 inches in length. It's easy to imagine following the trail for a way, then realizing you should probably be going in the opposite direction. And I'm the first to admit that the rear foot of a large bear superficially looks like a scaled-up human print, especially when looking at this enormous Kodiak bear hindfoot, and this grizzly cub hindfoot. It is easy to say that this is the origin of Bigfoot track finds. But of course, there's two ways of looking at everything. I have no doubt that bear prints have been mistaken for Bigfoot prints, but I'd imagine that more often, perhaps, Bigfoot prints are mistaken for bear prints. The odds of a bear creating a perfectly consistent trackway of double-stepped footprints for over a mile seems negligible. Even more negligible is the proposition that it was a hoax. Even if the pilot was involved and intentionally brought them to that spot, then why did he refuse to discuss it? And why don't we know his name? If it was the pilot or a friend of the pilot stomping around, surely he wouldn't have been so determined to leave the area. I'd imagine a hoaxer likes to check out his handiwork. So why do I think this account is particularly credible? Because the prints certainly left an impression on him. Something in the years to come led him to believe that an analytical study with a PhD in relevant fields was worth the effort. Something led him to believe that a relatively objective television documentary series was worth producing. Would he have done so had he not thought there was something to find? He went on to develop the rigging that was instrumental in some of the first clear images of a live giant squid in the wild. Something changed the trajectory of his career. And here's the best part. If you look at his biography on his company's website, you won't find the word Bigfoot. You won't find the word cryptozoology. Even his role as producer on Sasquatch Legend Meets Science is simply called Legend Meets Science. Hychek is a wonderful example of an otherwise normal person who had an experience that was so compelling that it changed the trajectory of his career, even though he doesn't seem to talk about it much at all. And that's because the word belief is involved, and oftentimes beliefs are best kept personal. It almost seems like Hychek is compelled to find answers to something he saw, but doesn't want to mention. And that's because he's smart. He understands that once you openly declare your affiliation with the North American primate hypothesis, you lose your merit to the rest of the world. I always find it compelling when someone seems to have better things to do than invest time and money into this subject, but does so anyway. And you can say, why didn't he film the tracks? Well, there was the bush pilot's request to leave, probably a schedule, and the risk of giant bear. But personally, I think he filmed them. At least a couple photographs. But I think he knows that the photos he has are nowhere near definitive, especially without the context of being there. Think about it. If you were in the business of picking up multi-million-dollar contracts, would you dare broadcast that you spend your time looking for Bigfoot because you saw what on camera and without context appears to be bear tracks? Even if he did film them, and even if they are of an unknown biped, I'm sure there is a small army of biologists, willing and ready to scoff as they prove that the tracks are merely impressions of a bear's overstep for over a mile. And if he was going to lie about all of this, maybe to hype his planned-out future career, wouldn't he be more vocal about it? The only account of this is in Legend Meets Science, and it's about 2 pages. If he was planning a lie, why wouldn't he have just made tracks and filmed them? It's not like anyone could fact-check him in any reasonable time frame. Sitting at home on YouTube, it's so easy to dismiss all of this as bunk. But try flying to a lake that's never been fished. It becomes much more difficult to claim that everything there is to know is known. Hychek saw crisp, 17-inch foot impressions in the sand that day. I think somewhere along the line, he decided that whatever made the tracks was on 2 legs, and that drove his career in a direction that he doesn't even want to talk about. What's the hardest riddle to solve? One that no one will admit to trying. Well, I guess I shouldn't have said a riddle that no one will admit to trying, because one man is about as vocal as can reasonably be expected. That man is Dr. Jeff Meldrum. Meldrum's path is different than Hychek's. Dr. Jeff Meldrum claims he always held an interest in the possibility of such creatures, and he is certainly more aggressive against skepticism than most. Meldrum's first claimed knowledge of what is described as Bigfoot occurred when he was 11, and he viewed Roger Patterson's documentary called America's Abominable Snowman. The documentary is largely about this grainy footage. Meldrum has stated, elegantly, I may add, that he was at the age wherein he was not yet, quote, indoctrinated concerning what could and what could not exist. Indeed, it seems his knee-jerk reaction to this film is similar to mine. If the creature that has been described for thousands of years over multiple continents is real, this is what it looks like. He has a PhD in anatomical sciences with an emphasis on biological anthropology. He is considered a global authority on the development of human foot morphology and the history of the mechanisms of bipedal walking. He never actually says it, but it stretches the imagination that he would choose such a specialized field unrelated to his interest in the Sasquatch phenomenon. In 1996, he was asked to participate in 5 days of filming for a documentary produced by a Japanese production company. Entertainment, he notes, is perhaps the only way to get funding for such endeavors. It took place in Six Rivers National Forest. They went where there were no roads. They had no motor vehicles, only the assistance of pack llamas. In the first few days of the trek, he found not one, but 2 separate trackways that were less than definitive, but certainly intriguing. The film crew decided that they had enough footage to invoke some mystery in their documentary, and the film crew left. But Meldrum and one companion lingered there for 3 weeks. With the llamas gone, they were now downsized to what they could carry on their backs. They went deeper into Six Rivers National Forest, hoping they could come upon an environment more conducive to tracking, when Meldrum came upon what he refers to as, quote, apparent foot impressions. He says the earth was too firm to cast the indentations, but he calls them unambiguous. He said they were 16 inches in length, and went uphill until they reached a rocky outcrop. Meldrum investigated the area the rest of the day, but nothing out of the ordinary occurred. After the 2 men fell asleep in their individual tents, Meldrum's companion woke him up just in time to catch the trail end of a long, drawn-out, quote, scream. Meldrum said he didn't know what he had just heard, but it was enough to rule out the possibility of sleep within the foreseeable future. And as the 2 men laid in their individual tents, they began to hear footsteps, ever closer, as if circling. Then they heard what Meldrum referred to as a clacking sound in rapid succession, quote, rocks or perhaps teeth. And sure enough, an identical sound emanated from the opposite direction. Then they heard the sound of tarp being crinkled. It was the covering of one of their backpacks. After what I'm sure was a moment of hesitation, the 2 men exited their respective tents and raced to the nearby backpack. The backpack had been rolled out of the tarp. The tarp had no punctures. The backpack's outer cover was unclasped. The contents within had been disturbed, but nothing was gone, and whatever had done this was nowhere to be seen. Not only was it a dark night, but there was fog, and the fog weakened the scope of their flashlights. They sat in the cold and the dark until they were too cold to remain, and they went back to their sleeping bags. Almost as soon as the 2 had settled into their respective bags and tents, the footsteps resumed, as if something was quite excited. The footfalls, again unambiguously, came right toward Meldrum's tent, and he called out for his companion to ensure it wasn't him, but he heard his friend's response from the direction of his tent. Again Meldrum came out, flashlight in hand. Remarkably, he states that 16-inch-long, oblong shapes were evident in the moist grass. The grass was still in the process of straightening to point to the sky, and the next morning brought rain that would not relent for 24 hours, so nothing happened. But the day after the nighttime encounter, Meldrum hiked through a game trail when a, quote, softball-sized rock landed without warning beside him. I've personally received reports of that myself, and what I find so interesting about it is that hoaxcraft simply seems impossible. A human is not capable of launching an object so heavy without being in easy or obvious line of sight. In order to not have had sight of the rock thrower, whatever launched the projectile must have been a considerable way away, which in my opinion simply negates human involvement. If any person is capable of launching such a weighty projectile such a distance, they're probably wasting their time hoaxing Bigfoot and should probably be in the Olympics. Meldrum maintains that the softball-sized rock was airborne. There were no high points for it to fall from, and it rolled after it landed. It ended up only a few feet away from him. Now Meldrum is very careful. To be clear, he did not rule out bear from the nocturnal happenings. But as far as the rock was concerned, he ruled out bear. He sat there a long time, but nothing moved, and he continued down the path. It was his final night in Six Rivers National Park. Unfortunately, the thrill of exploration can't compete with the more mundane challenges that life requires, but his final night there would not disappoint. Meldrum was awoken again to the rustling of his backpack. He called for his friend, but whatever was going through the supplies took off into the night at the sound of the scientist's shout. Again, Meldrum rushed from his tent. But there was no Bigfoot. But his backpack lay open. A bag of food supplies sat on the ground, quote, like an open grocery bag. Of flavored oatmeal, instant potatoes, dried fruit, and beef jerky. Only the flavored oatmeal was gone. Meldrum states that the flavored oatmeal had the sweetest smell, so that should be no surprise. The bag, backpack, and remaining packets had no punctures. He obviously notes that it is not in the nature of a bear to be so selective. Meldrum and his companion had only came upon one sign of people in the 3 weeks they spent in Six Rivers National Park after the film crew left. Meldrum, as can be expected from any mainstream academic, doesn't jump to any conclusions. He will go no further than hypothesize about the nature of what he encountered in the forest over those 3 weeks. But in his laboratory, it's a different story. Here I have to apologize a bit. In the spirit of fair use, I'm in my right to summarize with limited use of information in order to review and report, but the specifics of this research is not really mine to share. But I can tell you that he has accrued one of the largest alleged Bigfoot cast collections to date. Meldrum is very clever. He's covered his bases. He invited a very specialized man to look at his collection. The man is Officer James Chilcutt, who is a latent fingerprint examiner, whose career includes the unique experience of taking, documenting, and cataloging the dermal impressions of primates in research facilities as part of a federally mandated identification initiative. Chilcutt concluded that multiple casts attributed to alleged Sasquatch creatures exhibit consistent ridge impressions that are unlike those of humans and non-human primates. Human dermal ridges run transversely from left to right, while the dermal ridges of alleged Sasquatch impressions run top to bottom, more pronounced on either side, while the known primates usually have a series of swirls. As is startlingly thematic in the North American ape hypothesis, it is perhaps no coincidence that Sasquatch dermal ridges are unlike man or ape, but somewhere in between. Unlike either, but still similar. The width between the ridges is roughly twice as wide as the width between human dermal ridges, which basically kills the argument that a print is made with a wooden cutout and then a human gently presses his or her bare foot against the sides of the print. Obviously, conditions must be more than ideal for plaster in the field to capture so much detail, but Chilcutt identified casts that were obviously made by different feet, taken years apart from different parts of the continent, all with the same pattern. Chilcutt also picked up on artifacts that intrigued Meldrum from day one. Areas where rocks or pebbles had been underfoot that were partially absorbed by the ground as well as the flesh. This largely negates an inflexible wooden cutout or stamp. And that's not even what Chilcutt found the most compelling. He found scarring that had obviously healed, well known to him from the primates he has cataloged, as obviously they're not wearing foot protection. Meldrum said it took Chilcutt 2 hours before concluding that there is a biological entity leaving these footprints. 2 hours for a forensic latent fingerprint analyst with primate qualifications to decide that an uncatalogued primate is walking around North America. The fact that this isn't a bigger deal is disappointing. There are multiple cast impressions from around North America that exhibit the same species' unique flow pattern. These unique ridge patterns depict scarring and healing, and the casts display artifacts that absorbed into the foot, inconsistent with a static or rigid foot stomper. To be short, that's astounding. It took a forensic latent fingerprint analyst with relevant experience in non-human primate dermal ridge collection 2 hours to determine that he was looking at something very special. 2 hours. And if you ever look at some of the Bigfoot hoaxers' attempts to claim footprints as their own, their attempts at doing so are laughable. To suggest that a team of hoaxers traveled the continent for some 100 years, or arguably far longer than that, using flexible, faux skin cutouts with a unique ridge pattern and healed scar tissue, seems less likely than the creature known as Sasquatch being real, in my opinion. But of course, melodrama always follows these finds. Whether or not this is simply because this field is a circus, or because there is an organized misinformation campaign involved, is for you to decide. I feel bad for Meldrum, because it seems he finds himself caught between a rock and a hard place. His research is the subject of snickers from mainstream academics, but because he is a mainstream academic, he isn't truly accepted by the amateur Bigfoot research community. And as so often happens, instead of enjoying the best of both worlds, he sustains the criticism of both without the trust of either. Realistically, it is technically and categorically impossible for a scientist to research something as factual when it is defined as fictitious. But to me at least, Meldrum's book Legend Meets Science is one of the best resources out there about this phenomena. At an absolute bare minimum, it introduces Sasquatch research into the language of academic science. Perhaps its only shortcoming is that it fails to acknowledge, let alone account for, some of the stranger aspects that cannot truly be separated from the data. Whether or not he is right in doing so is obviously yet to be determined. When this creature becomes unequivocally and undeniably real, and the circus fails to reduce it, and the powers that be fail to contain it, it's going to happen fast. And if it does so in the next few decades, I suspect that Dr. Meldrum will likely be one of the most important men in the world for a while. Strange trackways in the sand, and undocumented nighttime occurrences are so easily dismissed as absurd, as nothing. But the fact remains that competent and credible people have had experiences that they cannot account for, and the majority of people who actually bother to look at this hypothesis tend to gain a bit of optimism. Think about it. Evidence has been retrieved and cataloged that holds up in courts of law. It really is quite startling to realize that most people who actually take the time to think critically about this subject tend to agree with it. There are just so few people who look at all. But to be clear, I have absolutely no doubt that many alleged Bigfoot prints are faked, and that's because they're valuable, and whatever on this planet has value, counterfeits will exist. But according to the man with the PhD in anatomy, with a specialty in bipedal foot morphology and primate locomotion, the methods used to produce fake imprints are inarticulate and inelegant, incapable of the apparent flexibility and dynamic ground interaction. Meldrum has said 100 times that it is not the perfect iconic Bigfoot prints that intrigue him. It's the ones that dragged and slurped through the mud, the ones that show that toes have moved. Like I said all the way in the beginning, these experiences are not unique. Unidentified trackways, rustling in the night, stones falling from the canopy, and rhythmic, percussive communications are not rare. In fact, they're reported hundreds of times a year to various entities. And people often forget, if just one single account of this is credible, and many are, then there is a large, bipedal creature roaming the forests of North America. Anyway, I do encourage you to like and subscribe, and hit this bell if you haven't done so in a while. And as always, thanks an awful lot for listening. Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and today I have a very special video for you. I've been struggling with this video for literally years, but at this point, I've decided that anything is better than nothing. So I'm just going to explain all of this to you as if I'm trying to explain it to an old friend. All the way back in 2018, I received some very titillating emails from a witness to Bigfoot, which is an understatement. He's a lot more than just a witness. And quite frankly, I stopped reading the emails because if any part whatsoever of it was true, I wanted to hear about it for myself. I needed to, I guess you could say. So I made my way to Michigan to speak to the witness firsthand. This was the end of February going into March of 2019. His name is Randy, and he now has his own channel, and he is the founder of Midwest Bigfoot Research, and I'll certainly put a link in the video description, and I'll pin his comment, should he decide to make one. The story you're going to hear is uncomfortable, and it's disturbing. In a lot of ways, it's too much. But one thing I'm completely certain of, well, as certain as anyone can be about anything, I guess, is that Randy isn't lying. There's no doubt about that in my mind. This is his truth, leaving two possibilities. He's crazy, or this happened. Gosh, I kinda hope he's crazy, but oh, I don't think he is. Anyway, all the illustrations you're going to see in this video are drawn by Randy himself to cement this experience and use it to better understand these creatures and the nature of their existence. The events occurred in 1977 when he was 10 years old. Okay, here it goes. It began innocuously enough. With a bike ride, Randy and his friend wanted to bike to the woods to play. It was August, and school would be starting soon, so they wanted to utilize what little freedom they had left. In the woods by Morris Lake, he found this strange network of bushes. They were hollowed out, and some of them were tall enough that he and his friend could almost stand up. This tunneling bush had a central room, and he found old tattered blankets and all sorts of shiny things attached to the walls, and pictures, and perhaps chillingly, Randy noticed that the pictures were the kind that come in picture frames, like the stock pictures to make the frame look appealing to buy. As 10-year-olds, they thought it was cool and didn't think too much of it, and they continued on with their day. Then they came upon two other boys, Russell and Mike. So now it's Randy, Randy's friend, and Mike and Russell. Russell was a few years older than the other three. Mike and Russell were camping there for the night, and Randy and his friend decided to join them. So they went home and got some sleeping bags in the tent and came back. But the sun had set, and it had gotten dark by the time they arrived, and they couldn't find Russell or Mike. So it's dark, and they can't find their friends. So they decide to set up a little camp with their sleeping bags. About an hour later, after they had just gotten situated, they heard Russell, the older boy from before, yelling for his friend Mike, over and over again, Mike, Mike, Mike. This drawing is not what Randy saw, rather, it's the reason that he heard Russell shouting for his friend. Then they started to hear other things, growls and screams, and according to Randy, these noises could not have been the result of any human. They were so frightened by the growls and screams that they got on their bikes and left. Randy told his parents what happened, and they laughed. His dad said he knew the boys would chicken out. The next morning, they set out to get their tents and sleeping bags, which they had abandoned, and this is what they found there. Russell was talking to Channel 13 News, and they weren't allowed into the vicinity where they had left their stuff. It seems that Mike had gone missing. He would be found 24 hours later, and he would never speak about what happened to him in those woods. However, it was blamed on a recently hired school bus driver. Randy did not put this together until much later, but a few days after this incident, he believes that he and some friends had spent an afternoon chasing a dog that wasn't a dog. According to Randy, these creatures are just as comfortable on 4 legs as they are on 2, especially when they're younger. About a week later, one of Randy's friends, a boy named Tim who lived a mile away, which was the closest house to where Randy lived, abruptly stopped socializing. And Randy thought this was strange, so one day at school, Randy asked Tim why he hasn't been around, and Tim said he'd been busy with his pet orangutan. And Randy thought, well, Tim's gone crazy. So on a weekend, Randy walks to Tim's house to see if Tim wants to play. Tim wasn't there, but the babysitter said that Tim was in the cornfield, quote, playing with a troll.
And the babysitter said he was playing with a troll.
The babysitter thought it was a troll?
Yeah, the babysitter said it was a troll-like looking thing. And
in the cornfield. That's 50 feet away from the house.
Yeah.
So Randy went out back, and he found Tim sitting right beside the cornfield, with all of his toys scattered around. Randy didn't expect to see anything, of course, until he did, and I guess this is what he saw. Tim informed Randy that the creature's name is Mike, and that he can say his name. Now, in hindsight, Randy believes that he learned the word after the incident where people were shouting for the human Mike in the woods all night. Tim informed Randy that the orangutan doesn't like clothes. After regarding Randy skeptically for a good amount of time, Mike the Sasquatch emerged from the cornfield and grabbed Tim's arm, as if trying to take him into the cornfield. Tim was not alarmed by this. Rather, he playfully said, "Knock it off, what are you doing, Mike?" And Randy learned that Mike indeed could say his name, the name Mike, though according to Randy, it sounded much like a burp. Now it's important to remember that at this point, the two 10-year-olds very much believed that this was an orangutan, and they played with Mike for hours. Sometimes Mike would retreat into the cornfield, and he would mimic the boys. Mike also liked to say his name, Mike, because apparently Randy and Tim found it funny and would laugh, which the creature seemed to enjoy. Then Tim and Randy went inside for lunch, and Randy went home. That night, only Bionic Woman was on TV, and Randy didn't want to watch it, so he went out to several barns on his property to play, as he often did. He was in the hayloft for a few minutes when he heard the door open. He thought it was his dad coming to talk to him about something, but it wasn't. It was Mike, the orangutan. And after regarding Mike hesitantly for a while, they began to play. And the first thing they did was press their feet together. And Randy marveled at what flexible feet orangutan had. This is one of the reasons he was so convinced that Mike was an escaped pet, because he was so calm, indicating, of course, that he was accustomed to interacting with people. Randy told me that when he was a kid, he had a penchant for making noises. So like if he heard a noise, he would repeat it, as a lot of kids do. And that led to their next activity. Randy would make a noise, and Mike would parrot it, but not only repeat it, he would elaborate on it, and make it impossibly accurate. One time I asked Randy what the Sasquatch sound like. He said however they want to. Randy would meow, and Mike would repeat the same sound. Only Mike's meow was indistinguishable from a cat, and the creature would elaborate on the sound, making it obvious that he understood what the sound was. So as an example, Randy would meow, and then Mike would meow, mew, and hiss. So he wasn't just mimicking. It's as if Mike recognized, that's a cat, this is what cats say. And it was during one of these cat mimics that Mike hissed, at which point Randy describes Mike's face appear as though it was melting or bubbling. Randy now attributes this to infrasound, which is known to have a wide array of effects on whoever hears it, and is also known to be produced by other large mammals. There were ropes coming from the ceiling, and Mike the orangutan and Randy played with them. And this is when Randy got a really good indication of this creature's athleticism and strength. Randy said it was alarming to see how strong he was. So, playing excitedly, as kids do, Randy decided to beat his chest and make an ape noise, like he'd seen in movies. And Mike repeated it, and his eyes turned red, and his demeanor became aggressive, and Randy thought he was about to die. And it was during this aggressive display that Randy learned that these creatures have an anatomical feature that I've never heard of before. He described them as tusk-like teeth that elongate from the molars, and they do so consistent with the mouth opening. So it's like involuntary. As the mouth opens, they protrude, and as the mouth closes, they retract. Well, poor little Randy no longer thought this was an orangutan, or at least not a friendly orangutan, and he went to flee, but Mike wouldn't let him. Again, looking back, Randy thinks that Mike was still only playing, like the mimicking game, where Mike always took it one step further. So Randy beat his chest, which apparently is an act of aggression to these creatures, which Mike repeated, taking it one step further. It's unclear whether or not Randy was actually in danger, and though Randy thinks that Mike was only playing at aggression, that still doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. Because normal actions to this creature could certainly prove deadly to a human, which has obviously been documented in other large primates. Much like Harambe, if you remember that. I don't think the gorilla was trying to hurt that kid. It's just that humans are less physically capable than a gorilla analog of the same size. And so in hindsight, Randy thinks that Mike was only play fighting. He didn't realize that at the time. And Randy started to scream for his life, at which point Mike pounced on Randy and made a strange hissing sound that Randy claims had a paralyzing effect. At close range, Randy was completely unable to move, not because he was pinned, but because of this sound. And Randy claims that the sound produced not only prevented him from moving, but actually significantly calmed him down. Again, in hindsight, Randy now believes this to be infrasound. Then Randy hears the hay door open, and he thought his dad heard his screams and was coming to his aid. He can't actually turn his head to look, of course, but Mike reacted and hopped off him. at which point Randy observed that it was actually Mike's mother, and she was angry. Again, in hindsight, Randy believes she was shocked to see her son fraternizing with a human, and the father was just outside the barn. So Randy now believes that Mike was using his infrasound to try to silence him, because Mike didn't want to attract the attention of his parents, as if Mike knew he was engaging in a forbidden behavior. The female Sasquatch kind of lifted herself into the hayloft, grabbed Randy, and smelled him, with very fast sniffs the way a dog does. And he said that the Sasquatch picked him up rather roughly to do this, and in the process, the Sasquatch picked him up by the waist and brought him to her nose. So like she wedged her thumb between him and the waistline of his pants, and I guess that immediately broke his pants off. So now he's as he was the day he was born. And then she kind of discarded him, or just dropped him, which I guess lacerated his thigh. And there's more illustrations of this on Patreon, but I don't think I should show it here. And he didn't draw anything graphic or anything, but still too graphic for here. And it's at this point that Randy saw the male Sasquatch watching from outside. Meanwhile, Randy's father is approaching with a rifle, and Randy depicted it here. The male could see his father, but his father couldn't see him. Randy's father saw from the kitchen window 2 massive hairy figures moving on all fours toward the barn where Randy was playing, so you could see why he would have taken off with protection. At the time, he thought they were bears. The female grabbed Mike and leapt from the loft, but Mike was still holding Randy, so Randy tumbled with them. Again, Randy thinks this is an example of the difference of the physicality between Sasquatch and humans. As a 10-year-old human boy, that was an extremely dangerous fall, but from knowing what he knows now about Sasquatch, he thinks that that would have just been normal, rough and tumble type behavior. Randy's dad appears, and he's cursing and exclaiming in shock. He can't believe what he's seeing. As the adult Sasquatch are retreating into the cornfield, Mike is still being held by his mother, and he's struggling furiously. He somehow escapes her grip and approaches Randy and his father on all fours. The adult Sasquatch don't pursue the juvenile, but they growl. Mike stands up a mere 10 feet from the humans, and Randy, who's still in a state of horror, yells for his dad to shoot it, which is kind of understandable at this point. His dad fires into the air because he had a 16-gauge shotgun, which was loaded for birds. He knew it probably could have ended Mike, but certainly not the adults. And being a father himself, it was clear that an attack on Mike would not have been appreciated by the massive creatures before him. At that point, all 3 Sasquatch disappeared into the cornfield, but Mike came out a moment later. Mike's parents apparently thought that Mike was fleeing with them, but he wasn't. With Mike approaching and the 2 parents nowhere to be seen, Randy and his father fled into the barn, because they still don't want to shoot, obviously, and incur the wrath of the 2 giant creatures. But there was a gap in some of the boards of the barn, and Mike once more tried to get a hold of Randy through that gap. At which point, Randy's dad hit Mike's arm with the butt of the shotgun, and then Mike grabbed the shotgun, and they played tug of war with the Sasquatch.
So Mike grabbed that gun, and he almost got it away from my dad, and he shot. Well, he had the... He couldn't get the gun away from him. My dad had his leg up on the freaking side of the barn. He's trying to go like, oh, he's strong. He's going like that. And he finally shot, and that scared him away, and it got quiet again.
And see, this is why it's kind of important to remember that Randy and Mike had been playing for a long time before things escalated. So Mike was likely still in play mode. Because if you think about it, if 10-year-old Randy and the Sasquatch are the same size, Mike probably has the comparative mentality of a 5 or 6-year-old human. Maturity-wise, I mean. And if you've ever dealt with kids of that age, then you know how smoothly ending playtime goes. Randy's father fired the gun, and Mike let go, and immediately after, they heard sirens. It seems Randy's mother had called the police. She didn't even know that Randy's father had gone out to the barn, but I guess from the window of the house, she saw 2 large animals and couldn't find Randy or her husband, so she believed there was a bear attack occurring and called the police. A squad car and an ambulance arrived. Randy and his father exited the barn, and the responders actually cut Mike off as he tried to enter the barn through a gaping hole in the front. And the policeman asked if there were 2 bears, as dispatch had told them, at which point Randy's father informed them that it wasn't a bear. While Randy is being put into the ambulance, requiring a few stitches at where the female had lacerated his thigh, Mike was crawling through the tall grass in a state of agitation. The police officer could see the movement through the grass, but the grass was too tall to make him out clearly, because Mike was on all fours. And then 20 feet from the ambulance, Mike stood up. Randy is hearing this from inside the ambulance, but all of a sudden he heard the police swear and fire their weapons. Randy is unsure if they were trying to hit it or just scaring it off, because Randy's father is begging the police not to shoot it, because he assumes the adults are still watching. And to me, this indicates the unfathomable nature and physicality of the creatures he witnessed. There aren't many animals in the world today that would be too threatening to two men armed the way they were, short of giant herbivores and lions and tigers and the largest of bears. And then all was quiet, and Randy received stitches in the back of the ambulance while his dad talked to the police. Then they hear gunfire from the direction of Tim's house, and the policeman's radio begins to chatter to that effect, so the police take off a mile down the road, and Randy and his dad soon follow. When Randy arrived at Tim's house, they found the police inside, talking to Tim's dad, and Tim's mother and siblings were packing up the car. They were preparing to leave, which they did. Forever. Randy found Tim in the cornfield, and he was crying. Tim told Randy that his father had shot the orangutan. It seems Tim's family had been relaxing after dinner when they abruptly heard screams and banging on the side of the house. Tim's dad got his gun as Mike came in through the bathroom window and went straight for Tim. Simultaneously, Tim's family began to scream as they see Mike's parents leering in through the window. Tim begged for his dad not to shoot, but Dad understandably didn't listen, and Mike gets shot in the living room, and he retreats the way he came. Randy drew this using a combination of Tim's retelling and simply by seeing the house afterwards. It was probably easy to piece together. Randy thinks that at this point, Mike doesn't realize what the guns do. He thinks they just make noise because there'd been so many gunshots and nothing had happened. And for the record, even Tim's parents thought that Mike was an orangutan, until they saw the adults watching through the window. I guess this was one of those instances where your kid's imaginary friend abruptly becomes less than imaginary. A search by law enforcement fails to find Mike that night. However, Mike's injuries were grievous, and the people who lived next to Tim's house, so 2 houses down from Randy, found Mike's body in a creek the next morning. Randy and his dad came over, and Tim and his dad were already there with the property owner. Mike was lifeless and rigid, laid out on a picnic table, in sharp contrast to how he'd always been. And by the time Randy arrived, it seems that an impromptu autopsy was being conducted by the property owner and Tim's dad. Both men were hunters, and both were accustomed to cutting, and I guess they wanted to figure out what this thing was. Once Randy realized what they were doing, he threw up in the cornfield, and he wouldn't watch, but he heard the 2 men's discussion. They described the hind tusks, which rapidly unsheath as the mouth opens, and strangely enough, 2 hearts, or at least another organ beside the heart that seemed to perform some function related to blood pumping. Randy would later describe this as a detached chamber. They also noticed that Mike's member was inside of him, whatever that means. The kid whose property this took place on took photos of Mike. They were just about finished doing whatever they were doing when Randy saw 2 massive dark shapes peek out from behind a barn. Randy realized what it was before anyone else did, and he ran for the house. The property owner screamed and ran too, and according to Randy, he wet himself. Tim's dad, however, having seen the creatures before, and therefore being slightly less surprised, went for his rifle, at which point the creatures disappeared, and not silently, they crashed away screaming. After that, Mike was buried in a trench that was used for farm animals. Ironically, Randy thinks that it was these graves that attracted the Sasquatch in the first place. Randy told me that a company that sold horse and cow feed to that area of Michigan made a terrible mistake and had sold feed contaminated with a chemical called PBB, a flame retardant. And this is one of the many things that not only surprised me, but surprised me even more to learn that it was very much true. And I guess the effects lingered in the livestock for many years and seeped into multiple products. Some days later, Randy was called to the principal's office. It seems the boy who had taken the pictures had brought some of the photos to school, and Randy was in some of them. Randy said nothing to the principal, and as far as he knew, neither did the other boy. But when Randy got back to his house after school, there were carpet cleaning vans there, and his parents were not. Some men there were from the National Guard, and others weren't. Randy now assumes that they were the infamous Men in Black, though he said they aren't pale, and they're not paranormal. He believes that they're a tribal entity, and that there are a few matters on the continent that they have jurisdiction over, and they avoid oversight because of their tribal affiliation, and therefore are not necessarily part of the government of the US. But I suppose there are a few matters that are deferred to them, according to Randy. and it seems that the soldiers had an argument with these alleged men in black on how to proceed, and it quickly escalated, but then cooled down, and it seems the men in black won. After the application of substances, they had Randy lead them to the place of the incident, and though he never told them where Mike was, he couldn't help but look to the grave. The family who owned the property was furious at poor little Randy for leading the authorities there, and they recovered Mike, and he was confiscated, and so were the tools used for the dissection, and according to Randy, all mention of these occurrences, including one newspaper that mentioned human Mike's nocturnal misadventure, were all scrubbed away. Randy isn't really sure what happened next. The memories get a little bit hazy, but through some kind of psychological technique, which I won't elaborate upon, all the youth involved were made to forget about this, to varying degrees of success. But all the adults, according to Randy, were convinced to maintain silence through more traditional means. And then 20 years passed, and it wasn't until the late 1990s, when Randy was in his 30s, that he began to remember this incredible saga. At first, it was only fevered dreams, then with little snapshots during his waking life. And then he began to sketch them, and as he sketched them, they came to life. And of course, these sketches are the illustrations you've been seeing throughout this video. And one of the many most astounding things about this whole case is that Randy was not even slightly artistically inclined until he began to try and draw his memories, and it also helped him piece together the memories and make sense of everything. And it wasn't until this point that he realized that he had any artistic inclination whatsoever. When I met with Randy, I had yet to work with an illustrator myself, so unfortunately, the complexity of that process was kind of lost on me at the time. The sheer volume of detail is truly astounding. If I'd been working with an illustrator and then visited Randy, I would have been far more intrigued by that. So the fact that he went from not drawing at all to being able to draw dozens and dozens of images of this quality, that's either a dedication and singular focus that I can scarcely imagine, or it's something else. And I think that speaks to his dedication, or even desperation, to cement this experience and use it to better understand these creatures and the nature of their existence, which to Randy are as real as the clouds in the sky. Aside from the obvious parts of this narrative that push the envelope in terms of belief, there was one thing that I found a little bothersome, and that is how much agency the kids have, 10-year-olds camping in the woods overnight, and being brought to such strange and ostensibly dangerous sights. I mentioned this to Randy while we were driving, and he super casually said something like, "Well, you're just a kid yourself, so you wouldn't know, but back then they used to treat kids like people." And I thought that was kind of funny. In the distant past, called the 1970s, a time before kids were treated like Pomeranians with savings accounts. Next Sunday, I'm going to upload a good chunk of the interview, with more of my thoughts and commentary on it at the end. I only included a little bit of the interview in this video for two reasons. First, I think it's good to go into this subtly, and come at the interview with a basic understanding of the events, because you don't want to go into this blind, and get your proverbial socks knocked off like I did. But second, and yes, this is a familiar sob story, but I've been having a tremendous struggle with monetization. Every video I make is a sizable investment of both time and money, so it's devastating whenever one gets deemed unsuitable by the all-seeing eye. Especially after I do the whole private upload shtick to run it through the checks, then it looks good, but a surprise comes later. So between this video and next week's video, I'm really hoping that at least one of the two will remain in good standing. And on that note, next week's video is already up on Patreon, as well as some 100 minutes of raw interview. And I promise you, it's unlike anything you've ever seen or heard. And there's a link for that in the video's description, as well as a link to Randy's channel. I want to mention that I brought my cameras and microphones for field investigations, not for recording interviews. Of course, I didn't expect to have to use my camera in the woods, but I know that had I not brought them, that's obviously when the Bigfoots would decide to have a parade. So my interview with Randy was never really part of the plan. I'm accustomed to Sasquatch sightings lasting maybe 3 seconds, and involving 1 or 2 people, whereas Randy's encounter lasted for weeks and involved many. So the interview initially was just so I could keep track of everything, for my own reference. I probably would have behaved differently had I thought people would see this. In fact, I only really wanted the audio, but the cameras have to be on to catch the audio, so I figured I might as well aim them at us. If it seems like amateur hour, that's because it is. And I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot in this video, so I'm sorry about that, but I think it's important to keep in mind that I had not worked with an illustrator at any capacity at this point. It just boggles my mind how the first illustrations I ever received to accompany a video were not by my direction. It's a bit strange how fate seemed to align that way. Whenever I make a video on a user submission, it's based off an email chain or 1 or 2 chats, and I kind of have the luxury of ignorance, so to speak, meaning I can kind of weave past or omit the mundane transitions and little details that accompany being alive. But Randy's story is just so specific. It is so specific. This is a lot of stuff happening really fast. Like how Randy's dad took off to the barn after seeing 2 large animals prowling around where Randy was playing. He didn't take the time to tell his wife why he was leaving because of the urgency presented by the maybe bears. Then as he's coming, the male Bigfoot can see him, but he can't see it. Then the police come because his mom couldn't find her son or husband, so that's why she looked out the window to the barn, which she only did because she couldn't find anyone. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but that's so much detail for such a small amount of plot. Usually, a report wouldn't include that level of complexity. Normally that would just be, my dad came out, and my mom called the police a minute later. And the fact that he managed to catch all this detail in his illustrations is just beyond me. Like how the foot here is looped in the fence. That's something I probably wouldn't have thought of if I was just describing a scene of a Sasquatch leaping over a fence. And that's just one example. My illustrator, Fred Dunn, is obviously a career artist, and I've been doing this for a while myself, and I think we would have struggled with this a bit. And Randy just plopped it all out, with no experience whatsoever. I don't know. With my channel being what it is, with what I do, I think I'm fairly well poised to assess the retelling of complicated events with the use of illustrations. And the fact that Randy just kind of did this, I don't know, I don't know. It's strange. The fact that he drew his account step by step is absolutely remarkable, especially with no artistic training or even interest until he decided to do it. And had I already been familiar with that process, I surely would have been more stunned than I already was. Okay, so the big question, did this happen? Well, there is one thing I'm completely certain about, and that is, I don't think Randy is lying. And I may have said this already, but this is his truth. I have no doubt about that. I'm sure Randy thought I was touched in the head because I'd ask the same question in different forms at different points of the story over and over again. I could not trip this guy up. He was speaking from memory. This was no performance. I'm sure of this. And even if it was all made up, why on earth would he include all the stuff that no one's actually going to believe, and stuff that he clearly didn't want to talk about? And I'm first to acknowledge that the human brain has a lot of gray area between truth and reality. Any psychologist will tell you that passing a polygraph about an incident is by no means assurance that the incident occurred as stated. And I'm convinced beyond doubt that he's not a liar, but I do acknowledge that it is possible to be honest and wrong. But he sure didn't seem delusional to me. I will say, and sorry Randy if you're watching this, but once when he went to the bathroom, I literally smelled and tasted his drink. There was no alcohol in it. It was some sort of lemonade thing. At one point over my 4 days there, I rudely asked if there was anything a bit stronger than water to drink. Lord, did I need it.
I found the monster.
He said he thought there may be some beer in the garage. There were a few, and they were long expired. And I don't know anyone with a substance issue that has expired beer sitting in the garage fridge that is otherwise impeccably stocked with Aquafina and Lipton's iced tea. And let me tell you, Randy is in good shape. Let's see, if he was 10 in 77, then he was born in 67, meaning in 2019 he was 52. I'm in pretty good shape, or at least I was back then, though not nearly as good as illustrated me, but I was certainly struggling to keep up with him. He just marched on, and it was actually a little strange, to be honest. And we talked about current events and relationships and the weather and all sorts of stuff, and Randy certainly seemed grounded to me. The only reason I tell you all of this is because to me, it's clear that he wasn't lying. He's not a druggo, and he certainly didn't seem crazy. So what's left? And it was Randy's emotion that really did it for me, as far as ruling out lying.
And they had Mike's body on a picnic table back behind their house by a pole barn where they had horses. And 2 of the horses had died of that PPD poisoning that I told you that was going around back then. And he had already dug a shallow grave. And it was typical back then, and the state would come pick these poisoned horses and cows up and put them in a mass grave. Which is another reason why I think the Sasquatches were close to my barn, was a dumping site from the farm next door that,
right,
were putting their cows next to our property where that creek ran behind their house. That's what they told them to do, because that little swamp there, they said, would clean their blood and like all the poisons that were in it before it hit the creek. I went down there sometimes and that creek was red with blood, where they piled those cows up until they took them. But excuse me a minute. Where was I? Can I take a break here a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna consider the drive 12 because they're still on.
Yeah,
we can take cigarette breaks if you want.
Yeah, let's go take a cigarette.
Yeah, because where did I leave off? I'll remember that now. I got over there. Like I've had to, like I said, the memories didn't all come piling back. It was bits and pieces in big chunks.
Right.
With pieces missing in between. Well, the government was already alerted to these Sasquatches, like I told you.
Yeah,
I was going to get to that at the end when they started talking about it, that, they were a problem. Well, and, people freak out when think about what that kid had to go through. Getting...
Well, you went through it too. But you weren't taken.
I could, even then, I could have handled it. They didn't have to hypnotize me. I wouldn't have been traumatic. And it was an animal, and that's they do animal things. They don't do human things.
Right.
They don't live by our set of rules. I knew that back then. I could have lived with that. I wouldn't have been traumatized. But getting taken at night, that would be way different. Not knowing what the hell. I saw what it was. I could see it was a primate.
I'm going to be totally honest. If that happened to me last night, if the car broke down and that happened to me last night, I would not recover from it.
Really?
No, I don't think I would recover from that.
I think it would be hard. Not now. Dude, I could talk about it. I can, if we had a problem with Sasquatch, I could talk our way out of it if you didn't freak out.
You could talk your way out of it.
They don't go to freak out mode right away.
You could talk your way out of it with it.
Yeah. If you don't freak out and start screaming, because they don't go to panic mode right away. If they're around you, they're checking you out because they're curious or you happen to cross your path.
Yeah.
And if
it's their home.
They're not going to immediately attack you. They're going to give you the bluff charge, or they're going to throw something at you, or they're going to just make noise and make you go away. Then the last thing they want to do, because they're aware of their own mortality, is get her to get into a confrontation with a human. They know that might
not end well.
Have a gun or
Right. All right, let's take that break.
They're smart enough to figure that out. Of course, the juveniles don't know that. That's why the Michigan Dogman thing is so heard about, because they're juveniles and people see the way they run. You see the way I drew them and the way they move. They look like a werewolf or a dog-like thing, because the way their feet bend like this, in the back, it kind of looks like a dog leg, and they're on their toes like that, and then their foot goes like that. You know what I mean? I drew pictures of it like that up there, but.
Lying is easy, but lying convincingly is actually pretty difficult. And the emotion which Randy speaks with is not something that can be contrived or falsified, especially repetitively. Again, I can't stress this enough. My encounter with Randy really caught me off guard. On the one hand, it's so counterintuitive to my perception of Sasquatch. And yet, after years of thought, I came to accept that the behavior that Randy described of Mike the Sasquatch is very much what I would expect of an adolescent creature of this description, going through what we may call the terrible twos, the need for attention, and the drop of a dime changes of attitude. And all things considered, I think Mike was actually quite well behaved. After factoring in his age and maturity level, I think Mike just wanted to play. And let me tell you, this weighed heavily on my mind during our night investigations. Anyway, check out my Patreon for my full interview with Randy, as well as our walk down Randy's Hall of Memories drawn. Next week's video is also already up there, should you like an early viewing. Anyway, again, please like this video and subscribe for updates. That really helps me a lot. And as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.